ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Hey Jez, on Not Stupid this week, I set you some homework to ask ChatGPT some serious life advice.
I did. I put my deepest, darkest thoughts into the robot, and what it spat out was fascinating and horrifying.
Almost brought you to tears.
It did.
You can find us on the ABC Listen app.
The polls tell us Anthony Albanese is going to win, but the ABC's election analyst, Antony Green, is not willing to call it yet. He'll wait for voters like these to make their choice.
Look, to be honest, I don't think there's a lot between the two of them.
Well, the Liberal Party get the place back on track.
I'm voting for the Greens. I could never vote right-wing.
Just my preference was Liberals in the end.
I'm probably going to vote Labor this time.
I don't like Peter Dutton and I don't want him in there.
Normally I would vote Labor. And I thought, no, shake him up a bit.
Antony has been covering elections for decades and is usually the first to accurately reveal the result on election night. Today, as he prepares to retire, he takes us through what to look out for. So, today, Antony Green with your election guide. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. Antony, you've been analysing elections for the ABC audience for, I think it's fair to say, a really long time. Just give me a quick history lesson, please.
It's coming up to 36 years. I was hired by the ABC in second half of 1989 to do a book of research briefs for the 1990 federal election. I think it was a 6-month contract. I think about 150 applicants, and I was the one with way more computer experience than anybody else, and I think they thought that was an asset, and I could work with the computer people to get things right, and that's how it's worked out over the years, as I can do that interface between journalists who are notoriously not good at numbers or computers and the IT people.
And with the computer age well and truly upon us, another vital member of our team tonight is the ABC's resident psephologist, Antony Green.
At this stage, Labor is truly hanging on to office.
John Howard is now only the third Liberal leader to ever be re-elected.
I think we can say the government has been defeated. What we're having a little bit of fun and games with is trying to figure out the size of the swing.
Well, a brilliant decision by management back then, of course, and now you're retiring, spending some more time travelling and cycling, I'm guessing.
Yes, while I'm still fit enough to do these tours in Europe, so I'll keep doing them.
So we're very, very lucky to have you here with us ahead of the weekend election so you can run us through everything we need to know. Let's just go big picture first. We know Peter Dutton was polling really well coming into the campaign, but things have really turned around for him now for the worse. Have we actually seen that happen before, Antony?
I don't think, not in such a short time frame. In the federal elections I've been covered, the one that reminded me most was 2004 when John Howard had been in office for a long time and there was increasing concern about inflation and other bits and pieces. And Latham was a new leader. Kim Beazley had been around for 15, 20 years. Two elections as opposition leader. Mark Latham looked like a bit of a breath of fresh air, but during the election campaign, he turned out not to be seriously not as good a campaigner as John Howard. And I mean, the polls were turning around before then, but it sort of changed more dramatically in the election campaign itself. And I think it was partly over Latham's performance in the campaign.
All right, well, the polls obviously don't look that good for Peter Dutton right now, but anything could happen. We do know, Antony, that a lot of people have cast pre-election ballots, so more than 4 million people probably up on that by now. Is that bad for Peter Dutton? What does it tell us?
Oh, it's not necessarily bad because pre-poll votes favour the coalition traditionally. Right. It's a little variable, the degree to which they favour the coalition, but as a general rule, they favour the coalition. And people sort of say things like, pre-polls will decide the election. No, everybody votes. I mean, all this is a difference between when people vote. I don't think there's anything mechanical happening which is causing people to sort of change their vote because they vote early. They're voting early because they've made up their mind. On election night, it means we've got to be a bit more cautious because we're not quite sure what that trend will be with the pre-polls until they start to arrive. And on the night, we will probably get nearly all of the polling places in by 9 o'clock. And it's about then that we start to get our first pre-poll booth. So if we see a significant trend, and it's a clear trend, we may be able to call the election. If it's a trend, but it's still within the realm of the pre-polls could turn it around, we'll have to wait on the call.
All right, well, just tell me before we move on, because you've covered so many of these elections, how have the campaigns changed over time, do you think? I see a lot of media organisations at the moment with headlines like surviving the election. You know, they use very short social media clips to explain what's going on. Are we just, Antony, not as into the democratic process as we used to be, do you think?
I think to an extent people just don't feel it's quite as relevant as they used to be. I mean, 40 years ago, governments used to do things. They'd build houses, they'd build buses, that you had your public works departments. Nowadays, everything is either outsourced, and a lot of government functions are about regulating markets. I think there's a sense there. People feel government doesn't actually do things the way it used to. Some people just don't feel it's relevant to their lives. I'm also thinking back to when I was much younger in the early 80s when they had the recession in the last years of the Fraser government. The early years of the 1990s when there was the recession under the Hawke-Keating government. In those two eras, what we saw was a dramatic increase in unemployment. Long periods of unemployment at 8-9% at the height of the recession. It's very significant that since 1990, the global financial crisis in 2008, the inflation problems of the last year, the few years, and COVID just before that, the policymakers have gone out of their way to avoid doing anything that kills jobs. So I think that's the big difference. I mean, there's those sorts of things, I think, are why people don't have quite as connection. Also, there just isn't in the same way people all don't all sit down and watch Countdown or don't all sit down and watch the same drama on television anymore or listen to the same radio programs or the same music. They don't listen to the same sources of politics they used to. That means that they're out there trying to communicate to particularly younger people who are using TikTok and Instagram and Facebook as news sources. And so that's where the parties are out campaigning. And in this campaign, it's been noticeable that the Labor Party's produced constantly better pictures. People who seem to be happy to meet the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister happy to meet people out there walking around, whereas a lot of the picture facilities that have been provided by the Liberal Party seem to be much more static in an office in a factory somewhere with a bunch of people standing around in the background. You might call it superficial, but that's the sort of level that a lot of people follow politics.
All right, yeah, well, the imagery, of course, really, really matters. Let's turn then, Antony, to where this election will be won and lost. Just remind me, first of all, how tight this is, because Labor hasn't got a lot of seats to play with, has it?
No, they go to the election with 78 seats. They won 77 at the last election. They won the extra seat was the Aston by-election. It's a bit hard to talk about uniform swing when there are so many seats that aren't two-party contests anymore. A uniform swing of 1% would lose them their majority. A swing of about 3.5%, if uniform, would give the coalition more seats than Labor. And the coalition for majority need a swing of 5 to 5.5%. So that's a big swing.
Yeah, I was going to say, that swing of 5 or 5.5%, has that ever happened before at an election? It's huge.
A 5% swing is pretty big in Australian politics at federal level. But then you also remember it's 1 in 20 people changing their vote, 5%. Yeah. But I think also the two-party analysis isn't always very useful because at the last election, the coalition had 35.7, Labor 32.8, but everybody else added together was 31.7. There was a three-way split between coalition, Labor and others. And that's why we saw so many non-traditional contests where either Labor or the coalition was knocked out and why we ended up with 16 members on the crossbench. Polls are indicating something similar this time, so there will again be a significant crossbench.
Are there seats then that are absolutely crucial? So if on the night they fall one way or the other, well, hey presto, we've got a pretty good idea about how this is going to go.
Well, I think the way to look at it is the coalition's the one that needs to gain seats. So they need to gain sort of about 10 seats just to equal Labor. So you walk around the country and you say, well, which seats can they win? Well, the obvious ones are in New South Wales, Gilmore, which is on the south coast, is a tiny margin. Bennelong, which has been redistributed, Labor won at the last election, a tiny margin. Paterson, just north of Newcastle, is about 2.5% from memory. There's 3 in Melbourne, maybe Boothby in South Australia, maybe Lyons in Tasmania, 7. You go to Western Australia, Tangney, you're getting to 8. They're the easy ones, and they're not getting the coalition above Labor yet. So they've got to get beyond those seats. There's where you hear seats like Werra, which is above 5%. In Western Sydney, you hear people talking about Bruce, about the same margin in outer southeast Melbourne. And this argument is going around that Peter Dutton's message is selling more strongly in those outer suburban seats where people have got mortgages, they haven't got enough government services, there may be a bit more crime. There is cost of living bites more there with young people buying houses, families buying houses. So that those may be bigger swings and they fall. So that the coalition need to break into those sorts of seats.
And are there, Antony, states that really matter? I remember when I used to cover campaigns like this, Queensland, it was just vital.
Well, for Queensland, it was that Labor had to pick up states in Queensland. Queensland is consistently Labor's worst state. But the last election, Labor won despite Queensland. Labor went backwards in Queensland. Some of the seats it expected to gain were actually won by the Greens. So we're in the starting position where Labor is unlikely to do worse in Queensland, so the election's everywhere else. If Labor starts to win seats in Queensland, they will win the election.
Do we have a sense at all, Antony, about how the Teals will do this time? Because they really did shake things up in 2022.
Well, it will be interesting to watch. I think Zali Steggall is the safest, as is Helen Haynes in Indi. But you've got McKellar, North Sydney's been abolished, Wentworth in southern Sydney. I think that one's probably, the redistribution has made that seat safer for Allegra Spender. Goldstein and Kooyong in Melbourne will be tougher. And certainly the Liberal Party's throwing a lot of resources at them and some very vigorous campaigning. And then Curtin in Western Australia, which is the equivalent, it's the most affluent seat in Western Australia. It's the establishment seat in Western Australia and fell to an independent last time. So they've all got tough battles.
All right, what about Clive Palmer? I mean, a lot of us have been getting, not me actually, but a lot of people have been getting these text messages from him.
Yes, there's no costings on those promises, I notice.
No, but I think he spent a lot of money on this campaign.
Yeah, look, he's standing about 100 candidates. He's only contesting 2/3 of electorates. A few newspapers have revealed some of them have black marks against their history. He may get a couple of percent in some seats, but it's a lot of money to spend. I mean, his best chance would be if people start to view him as someone to vote for in the Senate. I'd be surprised if Trumpet of Patriots can uphold one nation in any states, but we'll see.
Yeah, all right. Well, before too long, we'll all be voting on election day if we haven't already voted. We'll be heading into the booths and we'll be handed all these pieces of paper relating to how to vote, these how to vote cards on the way in. Now, that goes to preferences. So just give me a quick reminder on how the system works and who is preferencing who and what are we meant to do with these pieces of paper.
Well, nobody preferences anybody else. Voters determine preferences. The how to vote is a recommendation. Parties hand out how to vote cards, the two major parties, overwhelmingly to help people cast a formal vote. They want your first preference, which is why they hand it out. And if you complete a first preference, they want to influence to make sure you fill in the rest of the ballot paper correctly. To be honest, the available data is that 40% of people copy the how to vote card for the major parties, 40%. For the minor parties, that drifts down to about 20%. But every voter, the preferences that are completed are the ones counted, are the ones that the voter writes on the ballot paper. So, I mean, they're just trying to influence how you might complete the ballot paper and help you cast a formal vote.
Yeah.
But go in there, cast a first preference for the candidate you most want to see elected, and then your second most, and then your third most. Where it's got more complex in recent years is after 1, 2, and 3, most people can't really sort of rate the rest of them. And there's a bit of a tendency just to fill them in randomly. And that means that preferences tend to sort of wander a little bit. See, Green preferences on average at the last election were 85% to Labor. That's incredibly high for a minor party. That's as high as the Liberal and National parties get between the two parties, after being in existence in coalition for 100 years. But Labor and the Greens are not in coalition, but Labor. But a lot of people don't follow the Green how to vote card. They just go 1 Greens, 2 Labor. That's what they do. Last election, One Nation preferences flowed about 65% to the coalition. That's the highest they've ever flown in the past. There's talk they could get to 90% in some seats. I'd be highly surprised if that happened.
As we've referenced, of course, there is a chance that neither party wins outright, and that's when the dealing begins, right? For a minority government, that could take a pretty long time.
Oh, not necessarily.
Uh-huh.
As long as one party has significantly more seats than the other, like if one party's got 5 or 6 more seats than the other side, the party with more seats will almost certainly form government.
Mm-hmm.
Unless there's only a minor gap. The Gillard government was 1 seat short of the government, of the coalition in 2010. They did those firm agreements, and the first one was with the Greens from memory. Labor will not do that sort of deal with the Greens this time. And they've said they won't, and I would be very surprised if they did.
All right. Well, Antony, are you willing to predict it? I feel like no one really wants to do that.
No, it's not worth doing. It's not worth predicting beforehand. There was a YouGov MRP poll which suggested an increased majority for the Labor Party, and that's a brave call. There's a significant error margin on that, I must say.
Yeah.
But look, we will see on Saturday night. I don't spend a lot of time commenting on polls because I must say I spend an awful lot of time just preparing for election night to make sure all our models and data is correct. Yeah. I've been pouring through stuff this morning to try and make sure some of the figures that have come as history from the Electoral Commission are sorted out for changes of boundaries so it can be as accurate as possible on the night.
Well, all right. Well, we thank you for that, absolutely. Now, it's just about it for you, and you really have, Antony, been a passionate advocate for the democratic process for so many years. So what would be your parting words for voters?
Respect other people's points of view. The thing that is really bad about American politics these days is that when one side gets into government, they pursue their agenda and drive down their opponents. There's such a polarization in politics over there. Government is about consent. And I think increasingly what's happened, we're seeing a polarization, and a government party loses and the other side's party just say, well, we just won't respect this mandate. And I think sometimes you get into this deadlock where people spend more time trying to prevent governments doing anything rather than actually preparing to try and defeat the government in the next election. Democracy is still a far better system. We still get the choice. It's far better to live in our system, even though you may not like the current government or something. We don't live in a system where you can't, at the next election, turn up and change the government. And you'd rather live in our system than a system where you don't get a say.
Antony Green is the ABC's chief election analyst. He'll be retiring very soon. Catch him on Australia Votes Election Night Live on ABC TV on Saturday night. And for policy analysis ahead of your vote, please go back through our past episodes where we looked at housing, childcare, defence and energy. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed and Adair Shepherd. Audio production by Sam Dunn. Our supervising producer is David Coney. I'm Sam Hawley. ABC News Daily will be back again on Sunday afternoon with an election wrap with the ABC's Laura Tingle. And watch our feed on election night. We'll bring you instant analysis from the Politics Now podcast with the ABC's Patricia Karvelis and Jacob Grieber. Thanks for listening.